All right, a little early Christmas gift for all of you, whether you wanted it or not. It's time for another 2025 NFL mock draft. And I've posted the pics in the description box below so you can enjoy, have at it, criticize away like you always do. And it's fun, right? And we've still got, 4 months? I say that now, 4 whole months to the NFL draft, but that shit's going to come rolling by. You know it always does. And I'll be back here soon enough to be talking about we're 3 months away. We're 2 months away. Man, can you believe it's 2 weeks away? Man, can you believe the NFL draft starts tomorrow? Same type of cycle every fucking year. Now, for this mock draft, I didn't play through a whole bunch of different scenarios or anything. I started to go and I'm like, okay, let me play this out through the first couple of rounds. Now, I went to round 3, but admittedly I stopped with the Bears at pick 71 because I just wanted to see how it would play out from a Bears standpoint. I'm a Bears fan at the end of the day, so like I'm going to be a little biased there, right? So I didn't finish round 3. Just like it takes time to think about this stuff, right? You won't believe how long it takes. You're trying to sit there and mock up 71 picks of a draft. I'm just saying it does take a little bit of time because you're trying to factor in different things like draft position and team needs, projecting potential team needs, thinking about best player available and like themes of the talent available in the draft and where the hot spots are and when you anticipate runs. So it's not so easy as just throwing some names on a sheet and then talking about them. But here we are. So before I get started, I just want to say a couple of things. First, I don't know that I would feel great if I was a team in this year's draft coming up needing a quarterback to come in and be the guy. Do we really feel great about any of these quarterbacks? Do we? Do we? Like the way I look at it right now, and I've still got to go back and evaluate and grade these quarterbacks, so the perspective could certainly change, but if you took these guys, whether it's Shedeur, whether it's Cam Ward, Milroe, Ewers, whoever the fuck, you took them and dropped them into the 2024 quarterback class, would they be any higher, any of them, than like 5th or even 6th? It's a good reminder of, well, you could just punt on the quarterback decision for another year. Sometimes that might be true, and sometimes that might make sense. But that's not always a guaranteed thing. It's one of those examples of the grass always being greener on the other side until you get over there and you taste it, and you're like, why the fuck am I eating grass? This tastes nasty. So you got to be careful with that. We'll see how NFL teams evaluate these quarterbacks. I certainly don't expect there to be 6 taken in the top 12 picks like there was in 2024. There just isn't the level of talent there. There might be a level of desperation there for a number of teams, but not the level of talent. So let's talk. You'll see at the very top of the draft, picks 1 and 2, you've got the 2 Colorado kids going back to back. And that certainly is a potential scenario here, right? I would have to think that Dion and Shedeur would be okay with him ending up in New York playing for the Giants, whether Dable is there or as the coach or not next year. That's a big media market. You're putting him in New York, like putting him in that spotlight. That's just going to mean even more attention from Madison Avenue, an organization that even though right now feels like a bit of a dumpster fire, has had trends and patterns of figuring it out and putting together some stretches of winning a couple of championships in a 4 or 5 year stretch. They did it under Parcells in 86 and 90. They did it under Coughlin in 2007 and 2011. So, you look at this and you say, Shedeur could make a lot of sense there. Although, again, I like, does that really feel like a top of the draft type of quarterback? Meanwhile, Travis Hunter feels like a top of the draft kind of athlete. And I'd be really curious to see how NFL teams view him and how they grade him, and how Travis Hunter and Dion approach this process, how teams approach the process. Because if you're only drafting him as a corner, he's probably an elite prospect there and still worth like a top 5 to 7 pick in this year's draft in particular. But if you're saying, hey, we want him to be a corner and then do some gadget stuff and get some snaps on offense, like you are now talking about a top 3 of the draft type of talent. And he might be, in theory, the best player in this year's draft because he's an elite corner and elite wide receiver. And it'll also be interesting to see, like, what position does Travis Hunter want to play at the next level? Because you can make the argument, you'd much rather be a number one wide receiver, because if you are, and you make it through your rookie contract and prove it to be, you're going to get paid a shit ton more money as a wide receiver than a corner. Indisputable fact right now. Indisputable. By a big margin. So if you were solely money focused, I get it. If you are motivated by the, where is my best path to being an elite NFL level player, a multi-time All-Pro, potentially someday a bronze bust Canton type of guy, then it's corner. With some gadgety wide receiver stuff mixed in. I don't think an NFL team would do themselves justice if they drafted Travis Hunter this high, in part because of just the great all-around athlete and player that he is on both sides of the ball, and then says, hey, we're going to cut that shit off entirely and we just want you to focus on this one side of the ball. Like, why in the fuck would you do that? Like, I understand you don't want to play him 60 minutes, but come on. So for the Patriots here, whether it's corner, whether it's wide receiver, whatever, like Travis Hunter feels like an example there of, even if you need offensive line, I don't know that there's an offensive lineman worth the second overall pick in this draft. Travis Hunter is easy to justify as a second overall pick, so you go make that happen. That's just the way it is. Now, in terms of the Titans, they certainly, you'd have to expect to be looking at quarterback, and whatever one of Cam Ward or Shedeur isn't there, you'd have to assume that that'd probably be the guy. The Raiders, like, what the fuck are you doing? How do you screw up your tank this late? And even if you say you're not feeling like any of these quarterbacks in this draft are rock stars, you still want that top pick. You have sucked so hard all year under Antonio Pearce. Now you're screwing the pooch for what exactly? Where's your gain? Where's your benefit? Now, as of right now, you'd be picking 6, which means you might get the third quarterback in this draft. Maybe. Who knows what Cleveland will fucking do, and that'll be an interesting scenario, right? Cleveland can't really cut Deshaun Watson realistically just because of the huge dead cap hit that's associated with him, because they made the dumb dick trade for him and gave him the dumb dick contract. And it's what a dumb dick skid marks organization would do in a city that smells like shit at all times. That said, can you really expect your locker room to take you seriously if Deshaun Watson is a starter again in 2025? Because he's been so fucking bad. Just so fucking bad. And he's coming off of a serious injury. I don't know about that one. Now, let's talk about the Bears. I think, beyond question, the big focus in this draft has to be on the trenches. You've got a first-round pick that right now sits in the top 10, 2 second-round picks that at the moment, with theirs in Carolina, sit back-to-back at like 40 and 41, and then you've got a third-round pick. Like, at least 3 of those picks have to be focused on the trenches, and 2 of those picks have to be on the offensive trenches, on the offensive line. Now, I could sit there and say just draft 4 offensive linemen with those 4 picks, but that's not realistic in particular, right? It's also not realistic to say, based off of the positional value and the talent available, the Bears could look at this draft and say they don't like any of the offensive tackles there at 9, and they don't want to take a guard that high, so they might take an edge rusher, or if somebody like a Mason Graham is there on the interior, it's kind of like your 3 technique runs, disruptor, or whatever defensive scheme they're going to have under their next head coach. They might go that path, and then you go back-to-back in the second round with offensive line, or you take one in the second and one in the third. Like, there are different pathways here. But the overall theme has to remain the same. You have to fix that offensive line from left tackle to right guard. And if you're a Bears fan, you're still going to argue with me about Braxton fucking Jones being serviceable as a starter. Stop settling for fucking mediocrity, you dipshits. If you've got an opportunity to upgrade there, then you go fucking upgrade there, period. Like, what are we even talking about? What are we even talking about? So that's what I have them doing here. Now, I don't know if Josh Simmons ends up being a top 10 pick, as he had the injury that shortened his season. And, we'll see if he'll be ready to work out for teams. But it sure seemed like, as the season was starting, that he had the earmarks of being like a top flight, top graded tackle in this draft class. He really did. And then you look at the Bears in round 2, like Donovan Jackson, they've got to improve on the interior, that offensive line in particular, and I can't really see a justification for re-signing Tevin Jenkins. You just can't count on him at this point if you're the Bears. Time to move the hell on. And then Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall, bit of a flyer maybe. I don't know that he would even be there at this point in the draft. He might go through the process and end up being a first-round pick. He's been incredibly productive at Marshall in 2024. Was it like 17 and a half sacks? But again, pay a little less attention to the player and more in terms of the philosophy. Like, I would feel good about the Bears, especially if they were picking the right players, mind you. That's a big key here. If you told me with their first 3 picks in this draft, it was a left tackle, a left guard, and a complimentary edge rusher for Montez Sweat. That's a pretty good smart start. And then you look at round 3 and you're going to look at me a little nuts maybe and say Caleb Johnson, the running back from Iowa. Look, they need somebody that could be a real threat between the tackles, because DeAndre Swift isn't that, no matter how much Ryan Poles' dumbass paid him. And if they hire somebody like a Ben Johnson, he's going to want to have some type of David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs type of setup there. And for some reason, the Bears coaching staff these last 2 years has not wanted to go more full bore with Roschon Johnson. So let's assume that he's not a factor here. And potentially, if the Bears have a new general manager, he might want to start bringing in his own talent, if you get my drift. Caleb Johnson could be that type of dude that plays the David Montgomery to maybe DeAndre Swift, being more of that Gibbs type of role, right? Does more of the complimentary stuff. He's certainly not Jahmyr Gibbs, but I hope you get what I'm getting here. You know, because I could turn around and say the one thing that the Bears are really lacking on their team, period, are elite players, all pro level players. They don't have one. And if you come back at me with Jalen Johnson, I'm going to laugh at you in your fucking face. Again, they don't have one. And bottom line is, you need those difference makers, those blue chippers, those game wreckers, those game changers. You could make the argument, even in the top 10, that comes in the form for the Bears of an Ashton, Jeanty, the runner-up in the Heisman Trophy, the running back from Boise State. And I know that we're running a little counterintuitive to what I've said historically about if there's any team that doesn't need to be drafting a running back in the top fucking 10, it's the Chicago Bears, because that would be such a Bears football thing to do for a team that's always been so historically good, for the most part, in terms of identifying running backs. But I also can't deny, you look at need, the running game sucks. They need a big-time running back. It would still be prioritizing helping Caleb Williams. You have other draft picks, tons of cap space, draft picks in the future if you want to get frisky and trade some away to improve your offensive and defensive lines. Like, there's other ways to do it. There's more than one way to skin the cat. But what they don't have, again, is that game changer, that difference maker. And if Jeanty could be that, then the Bears absolutely have to consider him even with the top 10 pick. They'd have to. And if Ben Johnson ends up being the next head coach, I guarantee they'd be even more likely to make that a consideration, and potentially a very strong one. So as much as we want to talk about like having to address the offensive line, they do multiple times in this draft, no question about it. The way I've got it playing out, they address running back later, but they address the trenches because they've got to. And frankly, that's where some of the strength I think of this draft is. It is in the trenches on both sides of the ball. It's on the offensive line. And it's especially at the top of the draft. And then it's the edge rushers. That's a pretty good class of edge rushers through the first 2 days. I would say like in top 3 to 4 rounds even. So go where the talent is in this draft and don't overthink it. And address your big needs with talented players. So again, you can take a look at my mock draft. Criticize it later if you want. That's fine. I'm out.